Therapy with Survivors of Narcissistic Abuse, Part 2, The Client's Goals. How do you think about a client's goals in therapy? Are there other goals to pay attention to besides symptom relief? And is there a way to measure the effectiveness of therapy based on a client's progress towards their own goals? If any of these questions resonate with you, then I hope you'll find today's video helpful. A client's goals can be one of the most orienting parts of therapy for a therapist. Whenever I'm unclear about what's happening in a given therapy in a certain moment in time, I always go back to a client's intake form to read their goals that they listed for therapy. Doing this helps me to view what I find unclear with the following question in mind. How might what's happening now in the therapy reflect a way the client is working towards one of their goals? Well, the theory of therapy I work from, called control mastery theory, holds a lot of respect for the client's goals. That is one of the reasons I find this approach so effective for survivors of narcissistic abuse. In today's video, part 2 of a 6-part series, I'm going to discuss how control mastery theory thinks about client goals, how to infer and define goals with your clients, and how to discern goals that will further a client's development versus goals that may not do so. Well, today's video is the second in a series on control mastery theory and how you can apply this theory in your own clinical work. It's a 6-part series that covers these topics. Part 1 was an overview of control mastery theory. Part 2 today is about the client's goals. Part 3, the client's pathogenic beliefs. Part 4, the client's key traumas. Part 5, how clients may test pathogenic beliefs. And Part 6, 5 steps to case formulation. And my name is Jay Reed, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist in California who specializes in the treatment of survivors of narcissistic abuse. And I work from this form of therapy, again called control mastery theory, which really prizes the client's own efforts to overcome the trauma of narcissistic abuse and realize a fuller and richer quality of life for themselves. If this topic interests you, then I encourage you to learn more by getting my free ebook on the topic called Effective Therapy with Survivors of Narcissistic Abuse, The Basics of Control Mastery Theory. You can find the link in the description box below or by clicking here. Well, let's look at an example of a goal in therapy. You know, a client comes to therapy with a purpose. Something in their lives feels missing, unfulfilled, or distressing. And clients will typically state in the first few sessions what they hope to gain from the therapy. And you may even formalize this process and ask them in a form. From the perspective of control mastery theory, a client's goals usually point to a developmental milestone they had to give up in order to adhere to a pathogenic belief that helped them avoid the danger of losing their relationship with an emotionally or psychologically compromised parent, i.e. a narcissist, or it can be a narcissistic parent, it doesn't have to be. Well, let's continue with the case example of Sarah that I used in part 1. As a reminder, Sarah had a depressed father who would only seem to feel better when she was at home with him and working to cheer him up. So to prevent her father from falling into a consistent depression and being wholly emotionally unavailable to her, she had adopted the pathogenic belief that if she doesn't take responsibility for others' emotional well-being, then they will fall into depression. Well, Sarah came to therapy complaining of constant anxiety, feeling stressed, and unable to rest. In learning about her history with her father, her therapist inferred her pathogenic belief and suspected that her symptoms of anxiety, vigilance, and stress were a result of her having to pay more attention to others than to herself. Sarah stated that her goal for therapy was to feel less stressed. And in her first few sessions, she said that she was an avid swimmer when she was a teenager, but just didn't feel like she could take time for herself these days, take enough time to engage in this activity. Well, her therapist inferred that Sarah wanted to resume her developmental goal of taking responsibility for her own emotional well-being and freeing herself from the misplaced responsibility for others' well-being. However, it's important to define a goal that is more sort of measurable. You know, a goal, for instance, is less effective when it's simply the opposite of a pathogenic belief, as the therapist Inference essentially was. Ideally, a goal is more concrete and can even be observed. So her therapist thought about what Sarah had said in the first few sessions and reasoned that if she were to resume swimming or some form of exercise that she enjoyed, that this would be observable and reflect that she was putting her own needs first and feeling less compelled to focus on the needs of others all the time. Well, this example is meant to capture the thought that goes into inferring a client's goals. As you begin to understand the pathogenic beliefs held by the client and the kinds of traumas or key traumas that led them to adopt those beliefs in the first place, I think it becomes easier to infer the kinds of life changes that might reflect that the client has resumed pursuit of a developmental goal which they had to sacrifice to survive earlier traumas, usually in relationship to an important caregiver. Well, what if the client has a goal that seems unhealthy? An important rule of thumb when inferring a client's goals is to be careful where you place your therapeutic allegiances. So for example, sometimes a client who believes that they must be perfect to be lovable can express goals in line with this pathogenic belief. So if a client says, for example, that they want to be able to not make any mistakes at work sort of ever, then a therapist may do well to wonder if this goal reflects the client complying with a pathogenic belief rather than resuming their own development. And there's more to say on discerning the goal that will reflect the client's resumed pursuit of their own developmental aims. If you're interested in learning more, then I encourage you to check out my online course on effective therapy with survivors of narcissistic abuse. This 3-hour course will show you how to apply the principles of control mastery theory to the specific goals, pathogenic beliefs, and key traumas suffered by survivors of narcissistic abuse. Whereas this series is a more general treatment of control mastery theory and how to apply it, this course focuses on survivors of narcissistic abuse much more extensively. And you can find the link to the course in the description box below or by clicking here. Well, I hope that today's video has offered you a way to understand how your client may be working to resume their pursuit towards a developmental goal. And as I said, it's important to pick goals that are both observable, but that also would reflect such an underlying shift, that they now feel freer and safer to resume pursuit of important developmental goals, which they had to specifically sacrifice by adopting a pathogenic belief earlier in life. And in part 3, I'm going to go into a lot more depth on what is meant by pathogenic beliefs. And that will really make it clear how such beliefs interfere with the client's pursuit of their own important developmental goals back when they had to adopt the beliefs in the first place, and how they may work in therapy to surrender those beliefs or disconfirm them so they can then resume pursuit of important parts to their development.